When the extreme speed of modern AI-driven data analytics collides with the strict protocols of human subjects protection, research grinds to a halt. To solve this bottleneck, we must approach the Institutional Review Board, or IRB, as a highly deterministic routing system. This routing system runs on the mathematical logic of two federal engines, the Common Rule, formerly known as 45 CFR 46, and HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Protocol routing is mathematically determined by where a study falls on two intersecting axes, the magnitude of physical and psychological risk and the spectrum of data identifiability. To avoid bureaucratic limbo and accelerate study approval, modern principal investigators must engineer their protocols to navigate this coordinate grid. The vertical axis represents the spectrum of physical and psychological risk. The critical divider here is the minimal risk baseline. Federal regulations define minimal risk to mean that the probability and magnitude of harm are no greater than those ordinarily encountered in daily life. Any protocol exceeding this threshold, such as randomized trials or studies testing investigational drugs, is automatically routed upward to full committee review. Studies that sit strictly at or below this minimal risk line are routed to the expedited review tier. This expedited pathway is designed for specific, strictly defined research activities, including routine clinical procedures, non-invasive biological specimen collection, and low-risk behavioral surveys. While these studies move through the system faster due to lower physical risk, they still involve identifiable human subjects. The ethical obligations of informed consent remain fully active. Securing that informed consent for expedited and full review studies requires navigating recent regulatory shifts. The 2019 revision to the Common Rule was enacted to combat consent fatigue and improve comprehension for lay participants. Researchers must now include a mandatory section at the very beginning of the consent document that isolates the key information a reasonable person needs to make an informed decision. This includes explicit new disclosures regarding collected biospecimens. The document must state whether biological materials will be used for commercial profit, or if the research involves whole genome sequencing. Whole genome sequencing is the laboratory process of determining an individual's complete DNA sequence. By requiring upfront, synthesized transparency, this revision forces researchers to design their subject intake workflows around clarity rather than burying risks in dense legal jargon. The horizontal axis represents the spectrum of data identifiability, starting with direct identifiers on the far left. This axis governs secondary use research, which is the analysis of existing retrospective data or prospectively collected biospecimens. There is a widespread professional misconception that utilizing existing retrospective clinical data automatically bypasses IRB scrutiny. The distinction hinges on whether a dataset is merely coded or truly de-identified. If a key to decipher patient codes exists anywhere, even if the researcher lacks access to it, the dataset is legally classified as coded. Coded datasets generally require continued IRB oversight because the theoretical potential for re-identifying the human subjects remains active. A study cannot achieve true regulatory exemption as long as a systematic pathway to re-identify the subjects exists within the research institution's architecture. To push a dataset entirely off the regulatory matrix into the not regulated category, researchers must execute the HIPAA safe harbor method. This method requires the precise, systematic removal of 18 specific types of identifiers from the data. Critical personal identifiers that must be stripped include names, social security numbers, and geographic subdivisions smaller than a state. All dates related to an individual must be reduced to years only, and all digital traces, including IP addresses, must be scrubbed entirely. Once all 18 identifiers are removed, protected health information, or PHI, is transformed into raw data that falls completely outside of HIPAA restrictions. Mastering this safe harbor method is the most efficient way for data-driven researchers to accelerate their secondary use analytics while maintaining absolute privacy compliance. Generative AI and large language models, or LLMs, act as disruptive technological variables that threaten the established boundaries of this compliance matrix. LLMs are a class of deep learning algorithms that can analyze vast amounts of data and generate high-quality text. Processing coded datasets, or KHI, through standard cloud-based large language models introduces severe regulatory risk. Cloud APIs can inadvertently retain user prompts to train future iterations of their models. If a researcher inputs patient data, this constitutes an unapproved data breach and violates the core IRB rule of data minimization. One mathematical solution is differential privacy. This is a technique that injects controlled noise to mask individual data points prior to any AI interaction, ensuring the algorithm cannot memorize specific subject details. The hardware architectural solution involves utilizing local, secure LLMs isolated entirely from cloud infrastructure, keeping the data contained on the institution's own machines. This diagram shows the pipeline of AI outcomes. Researchers must aggressively monitor for algorithmic bias to fulfill the ethical principle of justice outlined in the Belmont Report. This foundational 1979 document establishes the ethical principles of respect for persons, beneficence, and justice in human subjects research. In the context of human subjects research, the algorithm functions as a potential vector for privacy leakage that the IRB must explicitly authorize and audit. Looking at the completed IRB routing matrix, we can integrate the axes of risk and identifiability with the new security constraints of artificial intelligence. Consider a theoretical protocol, the generative AI analysis of retrospective MRI data. First, we assess risk. Because the study relies entirely on non-invasive retrospective data, it drops safely below the minimal risk threshold line. Second, we assess data identifiability. The researcher systematically applies the 18-point HIPAA safe harbor method, stripping all patient identifiers. Finally, we assess the technology. The protocol specifies the use of a local, air-gapped LLM, successfully avoiding cloud data retention risks and allowing the protocol to lock into the exempt Category 4 bucket. By engineering protocols with a firm understanding of risk thresholds, safe harbor mechanics, and AI vulnerabilities, researchers utilize the IRB as a precise algorithmic framework.